The crystalline spires of the Interstellar Academy of Sciences pierced the violet sky of Centauri Beta 3, their surfaces refracting the light of 3 suns into countless rainbow patterns. Within these towers, the greatest scientific minds of 50 species collaborated, researched, and pushed the boundaries of known science. Today, however, the usual academic calm was disturbed by an unprecedented arrival. Dr. Xylith Valthor, Dean of Xenobiological Studies, watched through compound eyes as a small Earth transport ship docked at the Academy's arrival platform. Their crystalline exoskeleton shifted through shades of deep blue, a sign of skepticism among the Arthrosians. This would be the first human accepted into the advanced xenobiology program, and Xylith had voted against it. The ship's door opened with a soft hiss, revealing a young woman in standard Earth Alliance attire. Sarah Chen stepped onto the platform with measured grace, her movements careful in the slightly lower gravity. She carried only a small bag and wore a simple silver pendant, a compass rose that caught the light of the 3 suns. "Welcome to the Academy, Student Chen," Xylith's translator conveyed their clicks and whistles into Standard Galactic. "Though I must admit, your presence here is controversial." Sarah met all 4 of Xylith's compound eyes without flinching, a feat that impressed even the skeptical Dean. "Thank you for the welcome, Dr. Valthor. I've studied your work on extreme environment adaptations extensively." Xylith's exoskeleton flickered briefly to green, surprise. Most species couldn't pronounce Arthrosian names correctly, yet this human had managed it perfectly. "Follow me. The Evaluation Council is waiting." As they walked through the Academy's grand halls, other students and faculty stopped to stare. Humans were rare enough in this sector, but one attending the Academy was unprecedented. Sarah noticed several species she had only seen in textbooks, a group of ethereal luminarians floating in their containment fields, a massive geologian whose crystalline body seemed to hum with inner energy, and even a pair of quantum shifters whose forms flickered between multiple dimensions. The evaluation chamber was a vast amphitheater, its walls lined with adaptive sensors to accommodate the various perceptual needs of different species. 7 members of the council sat in a semicircle, each representing a major branch of xenobiological science. Dr. Xylith took their place among them. "Sarah Chen of Earth," began High Counselor Zwyx, a cerebral whose brain-like body pulsed with neural energy, "your academic credentials are adequate. However, we have serious concerns about a human's ability to comprehend advanced xenobiology. Your species has barely mastered interstellar travel." Sarah stood straight, her voice clear and confident. "With respect, Counselor, our relative technological development has little bearing on our capacity for scientific understanding. Humans achieved space flight barely 2 centuries after believing the Earth was flat. We adapt. We learn. We overcome." A ripple of electromagnetic amusement passed through several council members. "Bold words," clicked Dr. Xylith. "But understanding true xenobiology requires more than mere academic knowledge. One must comprehend the fundamental nature of life itself, in all its infinite variations." "Then test me," Sarah replied, her hand unconsciously touching the compass pendant. "Not just on theory, but on practical application." The council members communicated in a burst of electromagnetic signals, chemical markers, and quantum fluctuations. Finally, High Counselor Zwyx spoke again. "Very well. We have prepared a series of theoretical examinations, followed by practical demonstrations. Be warned, no human has ever passed these tests." For the next 6 hours, Sarah faced a barrage of questions and scenarios that would have challenged even veteran xenobiologists. She analyzed the life cycles of quantum phase beings, detailed the reproductive patterns of 11-dimensional organisms, and explained the evolution of silicon-based life forms in superheated environments. As the final test concluded, even Dr. Xylith's exoskeleton had shifted to a pale yellow, the color of reluctant appreciation. "You have exceeded expectations on the theoretical portions," they admitted. However, theory is one thing. Practical application is another entirely. Name your challenge, Sarah said, her dark eyes bright with determination. The council conferred again, this time more briefly. High Counselor Zwex's neural patterns pulsed with what might have been anticipation. Very well. We have decided on your practical evaluation. You will attempt to survive for 3 standard days on the surface of Nexus 9. A murmur ran through the observing students and faculty. Nexus 9 was infamous, a planet where the laws of physics seemed to break down, where even the most advanced environmental suits failed within hours. No one had ever survived there for more than a day. You may take one personal item, weighing no more than 2 kilograms, Dr. Xylith added, their clicks carrying a note of finality. Choose wisely. Your evaluation begins tomorrow at first rise of the primary sun. As the council filed out, Sarah remained standing in the chamber, her hand once again finding the compass pendant around her neck. A slight smile played at the corners of her mouth. What the council didn't know was that this primitive human had spent her childhood exploring the quantum caves of Mars and the methane seas of Titan. Her parents, both xenoarchaeologists, had taught her that the most powerful tool wasn't technology, it was the human ability to observe, adapt, and overcome. She looked up at the crystalline ceiling, where the 3 suns cast intricate patterns of light. Tomorrow would be interesting indeed. The Academy's equipment vault resembled a museum of advanced technology from across the galaxy. Quantum shields hummed softly in their charging stations, while adaptive environmental suits lined the walls like sleeping sentinels. In the center of this technological wonder stood Sarah Chen, holding nothing but her silver compass pendant. That's your chosen survival item? The equipment officer, a mechanoid named Unit 7, extended several sensor arrays in disbelief. A primitive directional device using magnetic principles? Sarah turned the compass over in her hand, its surface catching the light. It was my grandmother's. She used it to navigate the Australian outback during the Great Blackout of 2157, when all electronic systems failed. Nexus 9 doesn't have a magnetic field, Unit 7 pointed out, their vocal synthesizer conveying exasperation. The planet's quantum fluctuations make traditional navigation impossible. I'm aware, Sarah replied with a slight smile. But sometimes the oldest tools have unexpected uses. News of her choice spread through the Academy faster than a quantum transmission. By the time Sarah reached the launch bay, a crowd had gathered. Students from dozens of species watched, their various sensory organs fixed on the human who seemed determined to defy conventional wisdom. Dr. Xylith stood by the transport pod, their exoskeleton cycling through shades of concerned purple. Last chance to withdraw, Student Chen. No one would question your decision. Nexus 9 has claimed the lives of beings far more advanced than yourself. Sarah checked the seals on her environmental suit, standard issue, nothing special. Thank you for your concern, Doctor. But I'm ready. High Counselor Zwex floated nearby, neural patterns flickering with curiosity. The standard survival kit has been prepared. Environmental suit, 3 days of oxygen recyclers, basic medical supplies, and emergency beacon. Though given the planet's conditions, the beacon is largely ceremonial. The transport pod's interior was cramped, designed for utility rather than comfort. As Sarah strapped herself in, she could hear the betting pools already forming outside. The odds against her survival had apparently reached numbers that required quantum mathematics to calculate. Transport launching in 3 minutes, announced Unit 7. Final systems check initiating. Dr. Xylith approached the pod one last time. Student Chen, I feel compelled to explain exactly what you're facing. Nexus 9's surface conditions are beyond hostile. The planet exists in a state of quantum uncertainty, reality itself becomes fluid there. Temperature, gravity, even the flow of time can change without warning. Like a quantum storm in physical form, Sarah nodded. I read your paper on it, Doctor. Quantum cascade effects in extreme environments, brilliant work. Before Xylith could respond, the pod's doors sealed with a soft hiss. The launch sequence began, and Sarah felt the familiar push of acceleration as the pod broke free from the Academy's artificial gravity field. The journey to Nexus 9 took just under an hour. Sarah spent the time in meditation, a technique she'd learned from the quantum monks of Europa. Through the pod's viewscreen, she watched as the planet grew larger, a swirling mass of impossible colors, like an oil slick painted across reality itself. Approaching atmospheric entry, the pod's AI announced. Warning, quantum fluctuations detected. Standard landing protocols may be compromised. Sarah gripped her compass tightly as the pod began to shake. The atmospheric entry was like nothing she'd experienced before. Instead of the usual flames and friction, the pod seemed to phase in and out of reality itself. Colors that shouldn't exist painted themselves across the view screen, and for a moment, Sarah could have sworn she saw multiple versions of herself sitting in the pod. Then, with a reality-twisting lurch, they were through. The pod's stabilizers fought against gravity that couldn't seem to decide which direction it wanted to pull. Below, the surface of Nexus 9 revealed itself, a landscape that defied description. Mountains floated impossibly, their peaks occasionally trading places with their bases. Rivers flowed upward, splitting into fractal patterns before disappearing into quantum foam. The ground itself seemed to ripple with possibilities, each square meter existing in multiple states simultaneously. Landing zone identified, the AI reported, though its voice glitched between octaves. Relatively stable quantum field detected. Warning, stability estimated at 47% and declining. The pod touched down with a sensation that felt less like landing and more like reality deciding to accept their presence. Through the view screen, Sarah could see the Academy's observation drones taking up position, their quantum-shielded cameras ready to document what most believed would be her final hours. Environmental conditions at landing site, the AI began listing, temperature, fluctuating between -157 and +423 Celsius. Gravity, variable, currently cycling between 0.3 and 2.8 Earth standard. Quantum stability, marginal. Atmospheric composition, theoretically breathable but prone to spontaneous phase shifts. Sarah checked her suit seals one final time and gripped her compass. The pod's door slid open with a hiss, and reality itself seemed to hold its breath. Back at the Academy, the observation room was packed. Students and faculty from every department had gathered to watch what they assumed would be a cautionary tale about human hubris. Dr. Xylith's exoskeleton had settled into a deep blue of scientific anticipation, while High Counselor ZYX's neural patterns pulsed with what might have been concern. Beginning survival challenge now, Sarah's voice came through the quantum-encrypted channel, steady despite the impossible conditions. And Dr. Xylith? You might want to take notes. This is going to be interesting. The betting odds ticked up one final time, reaching numbers that would make a quantum mathematician weep. No one noticed that Sarah's compass had begun to glow with a strange, inner light, no one except High Counselor ZYX, whose neural patterns suddenly shifted to a frequency that hadn't been seen in over 1,000 years, recognition. Sarah's first step onto Nexus 9's surface felt like walking into a dream. Reality shimmered around her environmental suit, probability waves rippling outward from each footprint. The compass in her hand pulsed with a soft, steady light that seemed to push back against the quantum chaos. Initial observations, she spoke into her suit's recorder, knowing the Academy was watching. The quantum fluctuations appear to follow patterns, like weather systems of reality itself. She held up her compass, watching as its needle spun wildly before settling into a strange rhythm. In the Academy's observation room, Dr. Xylith's exoskeleton shifted to a confused yellow. What is she doing? That primitive device couldn't possibly. Quiet, High Counselor ZYX interrupted, their neural patterns intensifying. Watch. Sarah walked in what appeared to be a random pattern, but her movements were deliberate. Each time she stopped, she consulted the compass, its glow strengthening. After the seventh stop, she nodded to herself. As I suspected. The quantum fluctuations aren't random, they're harmonizing with something. She knelt down, pressing her compass against the shifting ground. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, like ripples in a pond flowing backward, the quantum instabilities around her began to calm. A bubble of relative stability formed, about 10 meters in diameter. Impossible, whispered Unit 7 from their monitoring station. She's creating a quantum synchronization field with a compass? Sarah's voice came through the communication channel, clear despite the reality distortions. The compass isn't just showing direction, it's responding to quantum harmonics. My grandmother modified it after the Great Blackout, adding elements that could detect and synchronize with quantum fields. She never knew quite what she'd created. In the observation room, High Counselor ZYX's neural patterns pulsed with what might have been satisfaction. She understands, they whispered, too quietly for the others to hear. Using her newfound stable zone, Sarah began to set up what she called a base camp, though it looked like no camp any of the observers had ever seen. She used her compass to trace patterns on the ground, each movement seeming to strengthen the stability field. The very fabric of reality began to settle into a more consistent state within her work area. The key, she explained as she worked, isn't fighting against the quantum fluctuations, it's finding their rhythm and moving with it. Like surfing waves, but the waves are made of probability itself. Dr. Xylitha's exoskeleton had cycled through so many colors of confusion that several junior researchers had begun taking notes on new chromatic patterns. But the energy requirements for quantum stabilization are enormous. The most advanced field generators can barely maintain stability for hours, let alone. Look, someone shouted. On the main observation screen, Sarah had begun expanding her stable zone. She walked in careful patterns, compass extended, and reality seemed to smooth out in her wake. The quantum chaos didn't disappear entirely, but it became more predictable, almost musical in its fluctuations. She's not fighting the quantum instability, High Counselor ZYX observed, their neural patterns forming complex mathematical structures. She's conducting it, like an orchestra. The compass acts as a focal point, a quantum tuning fork. As the first of Nexus 9's 3 suns began to set, Sarah had established a stable zone roughly 50 meters in diameter. Within this area, the wild temperature swings moderated, and gravity maintained a relatively constant pull. She had even managed to create what she called quantum anchors, points where reality seemed more firmly fixed to a single state. Day 1 observations, she recorded, her voice steady despite the incredible feat she just accomplished. The quantum fluctuations of Nexus 9 appear to follow underlying patterns similar to Earth's ley lines. My grandmother's compass, or rather, her quantum harmonizer disguised as a compass, can detect and interact with these patterns. She paused, holding the compass up to the twilight sky where impossible colors danced. But there's something else. These patterns aren't natural. They're too regular, too intentional. This planet isn't just a quantum anomaly, it's trying to tell us something. In the observation room, betting odds were being hurriedly recalculated. Sarah had already survived longer than any previous attempt, and she'd done it with seemingly primitive technology. But it was her last observation that caused High Counselor ZYX to emit a brief pulse of electromagnetic energy, a signal that hadn't been used in millennia. As night fell on Nexus 9, Sarah sat in her stable zone, watching quantum auroras paint reality with mathematical precision. She held her compass, its steady glow and now pulsing in time with distant patterns in the sky. "There's a message here," she whispered, though her suit's microphone carried the words to the breathless observers. "Written in quantum fluctuations, hidden in plain sight. We just needed the right kind of eyes to see it." Dr. Xylith, watching from the academy, noticed something strange. The pattern of Sarah's movements throughout the day, when mapped from above, formed a symbol. It wasn't from any known species, but it tugged at something deep in their genetic memory. The same symbol was now appearing in the quantum auroras above Sarah's camp, as if reality itself was responding to her presence. Perhaps, High Counselor ZYX mused aloud, their neural patterns forming increasingly complex structures, we have been asking the wrong questions about Nexus 9 all along. We sought to impose our understanding of physics upon it, when we should have been listening to what it was trying to tell us. As the last sun set, Sarah's voice came through one final time for the day. End of day 1. And to all those who bet against me, you might want to reconsider your positions. Because tomorrow, we're going to learn what Nexus 9 has been trying to tell us for all these years. The compass in her hand pulsed once, bright and clear, and for a moment, every quantum sensor in the academy registered a pattern that shouldn't have been possible, a pattern that suggested this was more than just a survival test. It was a key, turning in a lock that had waited eons to be opened. Dawn on Nexus 9 brought impossible colors streaming across the quantum-fractured sky. Sarah stood at the edge of her stabilized zone, compass held before her like a divining rod. The device's glow had intensified overnight, pulsing in complex patterns that matched the quantum auroras above. Beginning day 2 observations, she announced, knowing her audience at the academy was likely larger than ever. The quantum harmonics have shifted. They're stronger now, more coherent. It's as if the planet is responding to the compass's presence. In the academy's observation room, the excitement was palpable. Dr. Xylitha's exoskeleton had settled into a previously undocumented shade of turquoise, the color of scientific paradigms shifting. The human survival is unprecedented, but these readings. They gestured at the quantum monitoring stations with 3 of their limbs. They suggest something far more significant. High Counselor ZYX's neural patterns had become so complex that junior researchers had given up trying to map them. She's not just surviving, they announced. She's communicating. On the surface, Sarah began walking in precise patterns, her compass leaving trails of quantum stability in her wake. But unlike yesterday's protective circles, these movements formed complex geometric shapes. Reality itself seemed to flex and respond, quantum fluctuations aligning with her steps like iron filings around a magnet. The patterns, she explained as she worked, they're not random. They're language, mathematical expressions written in quantum states. My grandmother, she must have discovered this during the Great Blackout. That's why she modified the compass. She found something similar on Earth. A gasp rippled through the observation room as Sarah's pattern became clear from above. She had traced an enormous geometric figure that matched ancient symbols found on a dozen worlds across the galaxy, symbols whose meaning had puzzled xenoarchaeologists for centuries. Impossible, whispered a senior researcher. Those symbols predate space flight. They predate civilization itself. How could a human possibly? Because, High Counselor ZYX interrupted, their voice carrying an unusual resonance, humans have something we lost long ago, the ability to see patterns in chaos, to find meaning in madness. They don't just observe quantum mechanics, they intuitively grasp its deeper nature. Sarah had reached the center of her pattern. The compass's glow had become almost blinding, its needle spinning in precise geometric patterns. The quantum fluctuations around her weren't chaotic anymore, they moved with purpose, forming and reforming complex three-dimensional structures. This isn't a natural phenomenon, she reported, her voice tight with excitement. Nexus 9 isn't just a planet with unusual quantum properties. It's a message. No, it's a library. She held up her compass, its light now synchronizing with pulses from deep within the planet. The quantum fluctuations are data storage. The entire planet is a vast quantum computer, holding information so complex it can only be stored in probability states themselves. Dr. Xylitha's exoskeleton had gone completely transparent, a sign of total academic astonishment. But who could have built such a thing? The energy requirements alone would be. Look! Someone pointed at the main display. The quantum auroras had begun moving in new patterns, forming distinct shapes above Sarah's position. They were numbers, but not in any known mathematical system. It's base 12 mathematics, Sarah explained, her voice filled with wonder. The same system found in ancient Earth artifacts, in the oldest ruins on Mars, in the quantum caves of Europa. This isn't just a library. It's a record of something that came before. Before all of us. High Counselor ZYX floated closer to the displays, their neural patterns now pulsing in time with the quantum fluctuations on Nexus 9. She's done it, they whispered. After all these millennia, someone has finally understood. Sarah's compass suddenly projected a holographic display, another capability her grandmother had hidden within it. Complex equations filled the air around her, describing concepts that made quantum physics look simple. This is incredible, she breathed. It's not just scientific data, it's a history. A history of the universe before our universe. And. She paused, her voice catching. And instructions. Instructions for what? Dr. Xylith demanded, their exoskeleton cycling through colors of academic excitement. For surviving what's coming, Sarah replied softly. The quantum fluctuations, the mathematical patterns, they're not random. They're a warning, left by someone. Someone who saw the cycles of creation and destruction, who knew another cycle was approaching. They left this information scattered across 1,000 worlds, encoded in quantum states, waiting for someone to understand. The observation room had gone completely silent. Even the betting systems had stopped calculating odds, their quantum processors overwhelmed by the implications of what they were witnessing. My grandmother, Sarah continued, her voice steady despite the magnitude of her discovery, she found one piece of this message during the Great Blackout. She modified this compass not just to detect quantum fields, but to help decode the message. She knew she wouldn't live to see it completed, so she passed it to me. She knew humanity's gift for pattern recognition, our ability to think in quantum possibilities, she knew we'd be needed. High Counselor ZYX's neural patterns suddenly aligned into a perfect geometric shape, one that matched exactly the pattern Sarah had traced on the surface. The test, they announced, their voice carrying strange harmonics. It was never about survival. It was about finding someone who could read the message. Who could understand what was left here, waiting to be found. As the second sun of Nexus 9 rose, casting double shadows that danced with quantum possibility, Sarah stood in the center of her pattern, compass glowing with ancient knowledge. She had not just survived the impossible planet, she had begun to unlock one of the greatest mysteries in the history of the galaxy. And in the observation room, as betting systems crashed and academic paradigms shattered, High Counselor ZYX sent out a signal that had not been used in 100,000 years. Across the galaxy, hidden quantum receivers activated, and ancient systems began to wake. The test was complete. And humanity, represented by a young woman with a modified compass and an intuitive grasp of quantum mathematics, had passed. The final sun of Nexus 9 rose on the third day, but Sarah Chen was no longer alone on the quantum-shifted surface. The Academy's emergency transport pods had begun arriving shortly after her last transmission, carrying not rescue teams, but the galaxy's foremost experts in quantum archaeology in ancient civilizations. High Counselor ZYX themselves had made the journey, their neural patterns synchronizing with the planet's quantum fluctuations in ways that suggested they had done this before, long ago. Dr. Xylitha's exoskeleton had settled into a permanent state of iridescent wonder as they coordinated the rapidly assembling research teams. The compass, Sarah explained to the gathered scientists, the device still pulsing with ancient knowledge in her hands, it's not just a decoder. It's a key. One of many left scattered across different worlds, waiting to be found by species capable of understanding quantum mathematics intuitively. But why humans? Asked a junior researcher, their photonic brain struggling to process the implications. Your species is so young? Sarah smiled. That's exactly why. We haven't had time to develop rigid theories about how quantum mechanics should work. We still see it with fresh eyes, still feel wonder at its impossibilities. My grandmother used to say that humanity's greatest strength isn't our technology or our intelligence, it's our ability to look at something impossible and say, why not? High Counselor ZYX floated forward, their neural patterns forming shapes that hadn't been seen in the galaxy for eons. The precursors, they announced, their voice carrying strange harmonics, knew that young species would be needed. Species who could think in quantum possibilities, who could adapt to new paradigms without centuries of preconceptions holding them back. The quantum auroras above had become a constant dance of information, patterns that had been waiting millennia to be read finally finding their audience. Sarah's compass projected holographic equations into the air, each one revealing another layer of the ancient message. It's not just a warning, she explained, her eyes bright with understanding. It's a blueprint. The precursors found a way to survive the cycle of universal reset, the quantum collapse and rebirth that threatens all existence. But their solution required something they had lost: innovation. Creativity. The ability to think beyond established patterns. Dr. Xylith, who had been analyzing the quantum data streams, suddenly emitted a burst of surprised pheromones. These equations, they suggest that consciousness itself plays a role in quantum stability. That observation and understanding can actually influence reality itself, Sarah finished. Yes. The precursors discovered that consciousness, particularly consciousness capable of understanding quantum states intuitively, could help stabilize the universe during its cycle of collapse and rebirth. But their own consciousness had become too rigid, too fixed in its patterns. So they seeded the galaxy, High Counselor ZYX continued, their neural patterns matching the ancient symbols Sarah had traced. They left tools, hints, messages, waiting for species young enough, adaptable enough, to understand. And now we have 3 centuries, Sarah said, her voice firm. 3 centuries before the quantum collapse begins. But with this knowledge, with the tools the precursors left us, with humanity's ability to think in quantum possibilities. She looked around at the assembled scientists, her eyes meeting compound, crystalline, and energy-based sensory organs alike. Together, we can do more than just survive. We can help guide the universe through its rebirth. The implications rippled through the gathered researchers like a quantum wave collapsing into certainty. The Academy's traditional hierarchy of species and knowledge meant nothing in the face of this revelation. A human student with a modified compass had not just survived Nexus 9, she had helped unlock one of the greatest mysteries in the history of existence. The test, High Counselor ZYX announced, their voice carrying across the quantum-stabilized zone, was never about proving superiority or measuring advancement. It was about finding those who could see with new eyes, who could understand with fresh minds. Today, we begin a new chapter in galactic history. Sarah held up her compass, its glow now synchronized with pulses from deep within Nexus 9. My grandmother never told me everything she knew. She just gave me this compass and said, sometimes the universe needs new perspectives to solve old problems. I don't think even she knew exactly what she had found during the Great Blackout. But she knew humanity would have a role to play. In the days that followed, the Academy underwent a transformation. New departments were created, focusing on quantum archaeology and precursor studies. The traditional barriers between species began to break down as the magnitude of their shared challenge became clear. Humans, with their unique ability to grasp quantum concepts intuitively, found themselves working alongside beings they had once thought impossibly advanced. And in the heart of it all, Sarah Chen continued to unlock the secrets of her grandmother's compass, each discovery revealing more about the message the precursors had left behind. The quantum fluctuations of Nexus 9 were no longer seen as a hazard to be survived, but as a library to be read, a guide to be followed, a challenge to be met with innovation and courage. The betting systems in the Academy never quite recovered from calculating the odds of what had actually occurred. But as Sarah liked to point out, quoting her grandmother's favorite saying, the impossible becomes possible the moment someone doesn't know it can't be done. High Counselor ZWX, in their first official statement following the events on Nexus 9, perhaps summed it up best: "We thought we were testing humanity's readiness to join the galactic scientific community. Instead, humanity showed us that we were the ones who needed to learn how to see the universe through new eyes, how to think with fresh minds, how to face the impossible with curiosity instead of fear." And somewhere, in the quantum fluctuations of space-time, in the mathematical patterns hidden in ancient ruins across 1,000 worlds, in the very fabric of reality itself, the message of the precursors continued to pulse, waiting for more new eyes to see, more fresh minds to understand, more impossible questions to be answered with, "Why not?"